All right. Hello, business writing students. This is a couple of videos just to talk about how we're ending the quarter. We will end with a final reflection presentation. And this is something that I've built into all of my classes because I feel like it's essential to think about the work that we've done in order to continue to do the work, if that makes sense. So you probably already kind of noticed this with the self-assessments. And the self-assessments show us or allow us to reflect on a single event or a single assignment. But the reflection presentation is really to think about the whole thing, right? So with that in mind, I want to go kind of through a little bit of an overview, and then we'll go into some more specifics. So overview, and I just recently changed the point value for the final presentation from 100 points to 50 points. I don't think that's going to hurt anybody. I don't think it's going to harm anybody or help anybody, right? It's just another assignment. It's not going to drastically hurt your grade. If you need a little bit of a boost to your grade, getting all 50 points will definitely help. It's due December 13th, which is part of finals week. So consider this your final. And you have a couple options. So one option is to do a 5 to 10 minute presentation like this one that I'm doing right now, although this will be longer than 10 minutes. Using slides and recording using something like Panopto or Canva or something like that. Or you can turn in the PDF of your slides plus the script. That is what you would say if you were to deliver that presentation. So in either case, you're going to create 5 to 10 slides. In either case, you're going to be talking or writing the script for somewhere in that 5 to 10 minute mark. And the goal is really to do the reflection, right? And we'll dive a little bit more into that as well. So what are some things that you might reflect on? So things you might reflect on include some specifics. So that would be things like the assignments that we've done, the readings that we've done, discussion boards, video lectures, anything like that. So anything that you could point to say, well, yeah, the reading that we did on emails helped me understand X, Y, or Z. But you could also reflect on this in terms of things that are abstract. That is not a specific thing, but one of a bunch of things or the way that things interconnect. So for example, the reading process. What has this class taught you about how to read things closely maybe? Or the writing process. Again, thinking about back to the very beginning of the quarter when we talked about the elements of the writing process. Any other thoughts about writing or business communication in general? It might also include conversations you've had with other people about business communication or this class or just other observations that you've had. You might take into account your growth over the quarter, and that's the bigger picture, right? Have you grown as a communicator or a writer? And then similarities and differences in assignments. So that big picture of like, oh, I learned something with the email, and that actually was very similar to something that I realized on the cover letter, right? So hopefully there is some synchronicity in those things. Okay, so if that's kind of the nuts and bolts, I feel like I would be remiss if I weren't to say, okay, how do we do this, right? What's the process? So maybe take a second and think about how often you reflect on things in your own life and what value you get when you do that reflection. So a couple of examples. I tend to be a pretty reflective person, probably par for the course with being a writer, but even something like a hike, I will reflect on, if I have a birthday party for my daughter, reflect on that too. I'm always sort of looking at ways to learn things. So hopefully you see value in reflection as well. And there are different ways that we can do it. We can do a sort of informal, sort of chin scratching, reflection on something that lasts 30 seconds, or we can do a more intentional, deeper dive into that reflection, which is kind of what we're going to do. And I've kind of already given away my answer to this, the why reflect. But reflection is a big part of the learning process. It's a big part of a lot of business, whether that's a sort of after action review or something like that, where we're looking at a project that got launched or something like that, and we try and figure out what did we do well, what could we have done better, so that the next time around we can plan more effectively. So couple little quotes here. The first one is from the Harvard Business Review, which we've read a considerable amount of articles from the Harvard Business Review. And they say, research shows the habit of reflection can separate extraordinary professionals from mediocre ones. We would go so far as to argue that it's the foundation that all other soft skills grow from. So again, soft skills are kind of like more your people skills and things like that rather than a hard skill. But right, so this is Harvard Business Review saying, look, it's not just that reflection makes you better, but it is the foundation that will make you better in different areas. And also out of sort of curiosity, I wanted to find something a little bit more quantitative. So I found this much longer article, but I really like this quote. So I'll just read this one out too. Reflection plays an important role in promoting adults' learning. Reflection enables learners to question their actions, values, and assumptions. Through reflection, learners reviewed and revisited the knowledge they had learned, explored the depth of the knowledge, and reinforced the knowledge. Reflection allows learners to step back, to review the whole process of learning, and to recognize the value of the knowledge holistically, not just fragments of knowledge. Right. So again, when we get to kind of the end of a quarter, and this is the reason I like to do these reflective activities, is what did we learn, right? So in a nutshell, I think reflection helps us realize what we've learned. A lot of the time when I do these reflections with in-person classes or do discussions or discussion boards, people go, oh, right, I forgot that we learned that. I forgot that we talked about that. I mean, 10 weeks, 11 weeks doesn't seem like a very long time for a quarter, but there is a lot packed in there. And some of it may be things that you learned from the material, but some of it may be things that you kind of learned on your own. It's also proven that reflection kind of cements our learning, our knowledge, and allows us to think about, again, how can we do things differently? How can we improve? And it also allows us to think about why we learned what we learned. So, again, I don't want to go on a long tangent on this, but the why is kind of important, right? I think it's paramount, right? That we think about why we are learning something. Now, chances are you maybe needed the credit or you needed to take a writing class for one reason or another. Maybe you really did want to improve your business communication this quarter. I know some of you mentioned that. But why you're here, right? And if we're going to invest however many hours, call it 50 hours plus the tuition, so whatever you're paying in tuition, let's call it $700. If you spent 50 hours doing something and $700, you'd want something out of it, right? So it's that time investment and that monetary investment that we're looking at. So what is reflection? And again, this is... I know that you know what reflection is, but I kind of want to reinforce here that it's, for our purposes, the intentional process of self-evaluation rather than the sort of gazing at the wall and thinking, if I had done that differently, maybe I would have this other outcome. So we want to ask why we learned something, how we felt at the time, how did we feel at the beginning, how do we feel during it, how do we feel afterwards, consider what we might do differently, and kind of internalize what we learned. Now, that's what it is, but I think it's also important to know what a reflection isn't and what I'm not looking for here. I'm not looking for a simple timeline or events separate from reason. And I say this because a lot of the time I find that students, when asked to reflect, will give that chronology. First, we did the email assignment, and then we did the resume, and then we did the cover letter, and then we did... And part of the problem is, for me, obviously, as the reader, as your direct audience, I already know the order that we did things in. I don't know how they affected you or what you learned from each one. The other thing is there's a sort of illusion of reflection when all we're doing is that chronology. And by all means, you don't have to mention every assignment, every reading. Focus on the ones that were the most helpful or even the least helpful, right? I have a pretty thick skin, so it's not going to bother me if you say, hey, I wish we would have done this thing differently. I already know, rubrics or something that I would add upon reflection. I usually use rubrics. I kind of experimented with not this quarter. So, again, that process of reflection is separate from timeline. So how do we reflect, right? How do we go about this? Now we kind of know what it is. Well, I would say it begins with asking questions, right? And I think communication is largely about asking questions of who's my audience, why am I writing this, why am I writing an email rather than a letter, why am I writing an email rather than having a conversation, whatever the thing is. But what I want to start with, and this isn't necessarily in a particular order, but the order that these questions occurred to me. Why did the thing happen, right? Why did you take business writing, but why did we focus on an email? Why did we focus on a cover letter? What did I hope to get out of the event? Again, other than just maybe an A, what were you really hoping to get out of taking the class? What were your feelings during the event, either an assignment or just during the course in general? What were my successes? So what went really well for me? What were my failures, right? A lot of people don't like to talk about failures because they don't want to, they want to pretend that they don't fail, but we all fail. And some failures are bigger than others. It's not about in my opinion, it's not about the fact that we failed. It's about how did we recover from that failure and how can we use that failure to be successful in the future? What challenges or obstacles did I face? What would I do differently next time? And how can I use this experience? And I would encourage you too, with sort of number 8, the things that you learn in a particular class expand beyond just that one class, right? Things that you learned about writing from the email exercise can be applied to essays and presentations and what have you. Okay. What I would suggest is that you start out asking questions and recording your thoughts, right? Kind of organizing your thoughts in general, right? Journaling, mind mapping, talking to a friend or family member. Those are really great ways to do this. I really like journaling. I do it every morning for about 5 minutes, drinking my cup of coffee before I go to work. First, before I've done anything else, check the news, check my email, 5 minutes just to kind of map things out in my head. You can create a list of events. Now, I know I said a second ago not to do a timeline, and you can. I think it's helpful to think about, well, what were the events? And you could go back to Canvas and look at the progression of things. But once you have that, make sure you're fleshing those things out, right? And when you do that, expand on those thoughts, right? Explaining yourself to someone else, why you did something, why you think we did things a certain way. Explain to yourself or someone else what you learned, right? So think about that as teaching someone else. How do we teach somebody else what we already know? And our ability to teach someone else reinforces our own learning. And then explaining to yourself or someone else what you learned, right? Here's what I learned. Here's why I did it. Here's what I learned from it, right? And I can begin to internalize that. So the last little thing as we close out this video is I'll say this assignment is a different sort of assignment than we've done otherwise in this class, because you have a specific audience, which is me. So you can write directly to me in that presentation. Again, it should still be a semi-formal presentation and all of those things. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next video lecture. But in the meantime, if you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later.